I had just finished my tea when the phone rang. Camilla's name lit up the screen. My daughter, who hadn't called me in 3 years. My heart skipped. "So, how were the cookies?" she asked. I smiled and said, "Oh, I gave most of them to your father-in-law. He loves sweets." There was silence. Then suddenly she screamed, "You did what?" My hands shook. Why would she react like that? Something was very wrong. If you're hooked already, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more gripping family stories. 3 years. That's how long it had been since Camilla last spoke to me. No phone calls, no texts, not even a holiday card. I used to stare at my phone on her birthday, wondering if reaching out would bring us back together. But time passed, and silence became normal. So when the doorbell rang on my 68th birthday, I wasn't expecting anything but maybe a package from my old church friend or a flyer for a furniture sale. But there it was, a square white box, perfectly wrapped with pink ribbon and a card tucked underneath. I held it like it was something fragile. It had a certain weight to it, like it carried more than just what was inside. The card had only 4 words. "Happy birthday, love, Camilla." No mom, just Camilla. Still, my heart fluttered. For the first time in years, she remembered. Maybe this was a step, a sign that things could change between us. Inside the box were the most beautiful cookies I'd ever seen. Each one was different. Delicate swirls of pastel frosting, edible glitter, tiny sugar flowers. They were arranged in a perfect grid, like little pieces of art. It looked like something from a fancy bakery, not something homemade. But the tag inside said, "Handmade with love." I sat at the kitchen table just staring at them. I wanted to believe this was genuine, that my daughter had taken the time to bake these herself, to make peace. I picked up the smallest cookie and took a bite. Soft, sweet, hints of almond and honey, delicious. But something inside me hesitated. Not because the cookie tasted bad. No, it was perfect. But because it didn't feel like Camilla. She had always been sharp, calculated. Even when she was little, she'd never been one for baking or crafts. She was more of a spreadsheet and bullet points kind of girl. Still, I didn't want to overthink it. Maybe people change. Maybe she missed me. Maybe this was her version of an apology. Later that afternoon, I took the rest of the cookies over to Walter's house, Camilla's father-in-law. He lived just 2 blocks away and had always been a kind soul. We often bumped into each other at the store or at church events before the pandemic. He once joked that his sweet tooth would be the end of him. I figured he'd appreciate the gift more than I would. I hadn't had much of an appetite lately. "Cookies, huh?" he chuckled when I handed him the box. "Are they safe to eat?" I laughed. "Unless Camilla's baking has gotten worse, I think you're fine." He thanked me, opened the box, and immediately popped one into his mouth. "Heavenly," he said through a mouthful. "She should open a shop." I smiled, genuinely happy to see someone enjoying them. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I felt sick or anything, but because my mind kept replaying Camilla's name on that card. Her voice, from years ago. The last conversation we had, cold, angry, and full of blame. She had called me selfish. I had called her ungrateful. We both hung up, and that was it. Maybe this birthday gift was her way of letting go of the past. The next morning, I finally worked up the courage to call her. But before I could, she called me. Her voice was light, almost too casual. "So," she said, "how were the cookies?" I told her the truth. "Oh, I had one, but I gave most of them to your father-in-law. He loves sweets." There was silence on the other end. Not static, just a cold, unnatural pause. Then came the scream. "You did what?" I nearly dropped the phone. My heart jumped in my chest. "Camilla, what's wrong?" But she'd already hung up. And in that moment, the sweetness of those cookies turned to something else entirely. The sound of Camilla's scream echoed in my ears long after the call ended. Her voice hadn't sounded worried. It had sounded terrified. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, phone still in my hand, staring at the half-eaten cookie on the plate beside me. What could possibly make her react like that? It didn't make sense. She'd sent me the cookies. She wanted me to eat them. So why panic when I said I gave most of them to her father-in-law? I tried calling her back, straight to voicemail. "Camilla, it's Mom. Please call me, you scared me." Still nothing. The next few hours passed in a fog. I tried distracting myself, folded laundry, watered the plants, even pulled out an old puzzle from the closet. But every time I placed a piece, I thought of that phone call, her voice, her silence, her scream. Then, just after sunset, my phone rang again. It wasn't Camilla, it was Logan. His voice was shaking. "Irene, I didn't know who else to call. It's my dad, Walter. He collapsed about an hour ago. They've taken him to the hospital." My stomach twisted. "What happened?" I asked, my voice suddenly thin. "We don't know. He was fine earlier. He was even bragging about some cookies you gave him. Said they were the best he ever had. But then, he just dropped to the floor. He couldn't breathe." My blood ran cold. "I only gave him those cookies," I whispered to myself. Logan didn't hear me. "They don't know what's wrong. The doctors are running tests. I'll keep you posted." I hung up and stood completely still. My mind went blank. Was it just coincidence, or was Camilla's reaction somehow connected? I went to the kitchen and opened the cabinet under the sink, where I had tossed the wrapping paper and ribbon from the birthday box. I took them out and carefully laid everything on the table. The box itself was still there, empty, but clean. The tissue paper still smelled faintly like vanilla. I glanced toward the trash bin in the corner of the kitchen. Something inside me told me to look. I slowly lifted the lid and began to shift things around. Eggshells, a tea bag, napkins, a plastic spoon, and then a tiny bottle, glass, unlabeled, no markings. It was the size of my pinky finger with a screw-on cap and a few grains of white powder left clinging to the bottom. I didn't recognize it. I hadn't thrown it away, and I knew for a fact that it hadn't come from my kitchen. I held it up to the light. The powder shimmered slightly, like fine sugar or dust. I sniffed it carefully. It didn't have a strong smell, maybe slightly bitter, faintly herbal. My chest tightened. Something was very, very wrong. I placed the bottle in a Ziploc bag and put it in the freezer. Then I sat down, suddenly feeling exhausted. Walter was in the hospital, Camilla was missing, and in my trash was a mysterious bottle that I hadn't seen before. And those cookies, so beautifully crafted, were now sitting like a stone in my stomach. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept checking the phone, waiting for Logan to call with an update, waiting for Camilla to call back, hoping someone would tell me this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. But deep down, I was starting to feel something I didn't want to name. Fear. Fear that something horrible had been set in motion, and that I had helped carry it out, one cookie at a time. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Not that I'd slept. I kept picturing Walter lying in a hospital bed, his face pale, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The silence on the phone line after I told Camilla about the cookies still haunted me. I had to know what I was dealing with. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I opened the freezer and pulled out the Ziploc bag with the tiny glass bottle. It looked harmless. No label, no markings, just a faint trail of white powder stuck to the inside. But it didn't belong in my trash, and I had no idea how it got there. I slipped it into my coat pocket and decided to visit the only person I could think of who might help. Mr. McCarty, the retired pharmacist who volunteered part-time at the local health clinic. He'd known me for years and was always kind. When I arrived, he was restocking shelves behind the counter. "Irene," he said, smiling. "Haven't seen you in a while. Everything all right?" I gave a weak smile and leaned in. "I need to ask you something. It's probably nothing, but I found this in my trash." I handed him the bag with the bottle. He opened it carefully and held the bottle up to the light. Then he unscrewed the cap and sniffed lightly. Immediately, his entire posture changed. His face went pale, and he screwed the cap back on tightly. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "In my trash. It wasn't mine. I think it might have come with a box of cookies my daughter sent me." He looked at me for a long second. "I'm not a lab tech, Irene, but I've seen something like this before. A white powder like this. It could be aconitine." I blinked. "What's that?" "It's a poison. Comes from a plant called monkshood. Very rare, very dangerous. A few milligrams can stop your heart." I felt like the floor tilted beneath me. "Irene," he continued gently but firmly, "you need to take this to the police. Right away. Don't touch it again with your bare hands. I'm serious." I nodded slowly, my mind spinning. Walter had collapsed after eating those cookies. Camilla had panicked when I told her he'd had them, and now this bottle, filled with a poison I'd never even heard of, was in my trash. I went straight to the police station and asked to speak with someone about a possible poisoning. They brought me to a detective, Mason Klein. He was calm with kind eyes but a very sharp presence. He listened carefully as I explained everything: the cookies, Camilla's scream, the bottle, Walter's collapse. I handed over the bottle and the remains of the cookie I had saved in the fridge. He didn't ask many questions at first, just nodded, took notes, and said they'd send everything to a lab for testing. Before I left, he asked one final question. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you believe your daughter would ever want to hurt you?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I wanted to say, "Of course not." I wanted to defend her, but the words wouldn't come. "I don't know," I whispered. "I honestly don't know anymore." As I walked back home, the world around me felt different, like it had cracked open and revealed something rotten beneath the surface. I had spent the last 3 years hoping Camilla would reach out, hoping she'd find her way back to me. But now, all I could do was wait, for the test results, for answers, for the truth I wasn't sure I wanted to know. And in my chest, the first seeds of dread had begun to take root. 2 days passed. I stayed home, barely eating, barely sleeping. Every time the phone rang, my heart jumped. I kept telling myself it could still be a mistake, that maybe Walter had a heart condition no one knew about, that the bottle in my trash had nothing to do with the cookies. But deep down, I was starting to accept what I didn't want to believe. Camilla might have meant to hurt someone, maybe even me. On the 3rd day, Detective Klein called. "Irene," he said calmly, "the lab finished the first round of tests. We'd like you to come in." My knees felt weak. "Just tell me, was there poison in the cookies?" A long pause. "Yes, the tests confirmed the presence of aconitine." My breath left me. My hand clutched the phone tighter as if bracing for a fall. He continued, "It was baked into several of the cookies, but not all. The bottle you brought in contained traces of the same compound. Irene, this was not accidental." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, staring at the little plate where I had once placed that first cookie. The memory felt like a scene from another life. "Is Walter?" I asked softly. "He's stable, but still in the ICU," the detective said. "He's lucky. The dose wasn't high enough to be fatal, but it was enough to cause severe cardiac symptoms. He's not out of the woods, but the doctors are hopeful." Tears welled in my eyes, a painful mix of guilt and relief. If I hadn't shared those cookies, would I be the one in that hospital bed right now? Detective Klein continued, "We've tried contacting your daughter, but she hasn't responded to our calls or emails. According to her employer, she hasn't shown up for work all week." "She's hiding," I whispered. "We'll find her," he said. "But I need to ask, Irene, Was there any recent conflict between Camilla and Walter? Any reason she might have wanted to harm him? I thought back. Walter was always calm, polite, easygoing. But I remembered something Camilla once said years ago, before the estrangement. We'd been arguing, about money, of course, and she muttered something about how Walter treated her like a child and kept her from accessing what was rightfully hers. It made no sense to me at the time. I thought she was just angry. She said he was controlling, I murmured. About money, I don't know the details. The detective made a note. When I hung up, I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there watching dust float in the sunlight, listening to the clock tick louder than it should. My mind kept going back to that box. How perfect it looked. How beautiful the cookies were. It wasn't just a gift. It was a weapon wrapped in ribbon. And I had held it in my hands like it was something sacred. I had wanted to believe it meant she cared. And maybe, in a twisted way, she did. Maybe she knew I wouldn't eat them all. Maybe she hoped I'd share. Or maybe she thought I was alone enough to eat every single one. I didn't know what was worse, that she had tried to hurt Walter, or that I might have been the original target. The silence in my house felt heavier than ever. A day later, the doorbell rang. I opened it expecting another officer, or maybe a neighbor, but it was Logan, Camilla's husband. His face was drawn, his eyes tired. He held a small manila envelope in one hand. "Irene," he said quietly, "we need to talk." And just like that, the questions I had tried to avoid came flooding back. What had happened to my daughter? What was she capable of? And how long had the truth been sitting quietly beneath the surface, waiting to be unwrapped? Logan stood in my doorway like a man carrying something too heavy for one pair of hands. His clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes were puffy, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Come in," I said quietly. He stepped inside and sat at the kitchen table, right where Camilla's box of cookies had once sat. I made us some tea out of habit, even though neither of us touched it. The envelope in his hand rested between us like a ticking clock. "I haven't heard from her," I said, "since that phone call, since she screamed." "I have," he said, "twice. Short messages, both from untraceable numbers. She said she needed time and that everything would make sense soon." "Make sense?" I repeated, almost laughing. "Logan, Walter nearly died." He nodded, pressing his fingers to his eyes. "I know, that's why I'm here. There's a lot you don't know, things I didn't want to believe, but I can't protect her anymore." He pushed the envelope toward me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were copies of documents, bank records, emails, messages I didn't understand at first. Then I saw the pattern. Thousands of dollars moved between accounts. One under Camilla's name, another under a fake business name. Payments that didn't belong. "She was draining Walter's savings," Logan said flatly. "Little by little, for over a year. He found out last month. Told her he'd press charges unless she returned the money. She panicked." I stared at the pages. My daughter, my child, doing something so cold, so calculated. "Why didn't you come forward before?" I asked. "I wanted to protect her," he admitted, shame filling his voice. "She told me she'd fix it. Said she'd talk to Walter, convince him to keep it quiet. She said she just needed more time." "And you believed her?" "I wanted to," he said. "But then you called, told me about the cookies, and when my father collapsed that same night, he didn't finish. He didn't have to." I looked back down at the documents. The evidence was right in front of me, but my heart still struggled to catch up with my eyes. "Did she say anything about me?" I asked, my voice small. He hesitated. "No, but she sent you the cookies, didn't she?" I nodded slowly. "She must have known you'd share them," Logan added. "She always said you were generous to a fault." That stung. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was realizing that everything she'd done, from the silence to the sudden gift, had been part of something darker. I wasn't just a forgotten mother. I had been part of her plan. I thought back to when Camilla was little. She used to bring me dandelions from the yard, believing they were real flowers. She'd beam with pride when I put them in a glass of water on the windowsill. Where had that little girl gone? She was angry at Walter, Logan continued. But I think she was angry at you too, for the past, for the silence, for things that were never fully said. I wiped my eyes. I tried. I did my best. I know, he said gently, but Camilla, she's not the same person anymore. I looked out the window. The sky was gray, and a soft drizzle tapped against the glass. The world felt muted, like it was holding its breath. What happens now? I asked. The police are closing in, he said. They're tracking the burner phones. They've issued a warrant. It's only a matter of time. I nodded, though the words barely registered. My daughter had become a stranger, and somehow, despite everything, a part of me still wanted to believe there was some piece of her, some small spark, that hadn't completely gone dark. But I wasn't sure anymore, and that was the part that hurt the most. After Logan left, I sat at the kitchen table for hours, the documents still spread out in front of me. My eyes scanned the bank records again and again, though I already knew what they showed: theft, lies, and a carefully planned betrayal. But what gnawed at me wasn't just what Camilla had done. It was the growing realization that I had missed the signs, all of them. I opened an old cedar box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were letters, birthday cards, school drawings, all things Camilla had given me over the years, from her childhood to her college days. I searched through them, not for memories, but for answers. In her teenage letters, I found complaints I had once dismissed as normal moodiness. You never listen. You always took Dad's side. I feel invisible. I had chalked it up to adolescence, but now it felt like the beginning of something deeper. A slow unraveling. Camilla had always been clever. She knew how to say what people wanted to hear. In school, teachers loved her. At church, she smiled and shook hands. But at home, there was a growing coldness. After her father passed, things got worse. She became distant. I tried to reach her, but she shut down completely. And then one day we argued, and she walked out of my house, out of my life. 3 years of silence. Then cookies. I walked over to the small freezer and opened it. There, sealed in a plastic bag, was the untouched cookie I had frozen after that terrifying phone call. It sat in the ice, beautiful and deadly. I stared at it like it was a message from another world. The note she had included with the cookies was still in my drawer. I pulled it out and read it again. Hope you enjoy every bite. You deserve it. It chilled me now. Was that sarcasm? A warning? Or a twisted farewell? That evening, Detective Klein called again. We found her, he said. My heart stopped. Where? A motel outside of Des Moines. She checked in under a false name. We matched the fingerprints to confirm it's her. She's in custody. I sat down slowly. Did she say anything? She's not talking, but we found items in her possession. Burner phones, cash, and printed instructions on how to leave the country without being traced. My throat tightened. So she was planning to run. Yes, and based on what we found on her laptop, she may have been planning this for a long time. I didn't ask what was on the laptop. I wasn't sure I could handle knowing just yet. After the call, I sat in the living room, lights off, watching the shadows shift across the walls. I wasn't surprised that Camilla had been caught. I wasn't even surprised that she hadn't said a word. But I was stunned by how numb I felt. There was no anger left in me. Only grief. Grief for the daughter I once knew. Grief for the woman she had become. Grief for all the time between us that had gone to waste. The next morning, Logan called again. Walter had regained consciousness. Weak, but stable. I told him everything, Logan said. He wants to see you. I agreed to visit later in the week. Maybe it would bring some peace for both of us. But before that, I did one last thing. I went to the back of the hallway closet and pulled down a dusty photo album. Inside were old pictures of Camilla, laughing, holding her first puppy, blowing out candles at age 10. I needed to remember that girl, the one before all of this, the one who still lived somewhere inside those frozen memories, because I knew the woman in custody was not the daughter I once held in my arms, and I didn't know if I'd ever see that girl again. 3 days after Camilla's arrest, I finally visited Walter at the hospital. He looked frail in the bed, his skin pale and thin, but his eyes, those were still strong. He smiled when he saw me, and I felt a rush of guilt I wasn't sure I'd ever shake. "Irene," he rasped, "still bringing dangerous sweets around town?" I let out a soft, broken laugh. He was trying to lighten the mood, but I could see the weariness in his face. "I'm so sorry, Walter," I said quietly. "I had no idea. I thought it was just a birthday gift." "I know," he said, his voice softer. "You trusted her. So did I." He reached out and I held his hand. We didn't need to say anything else for a while, just sat in silence, sharing the weight of what we'd both been through. Later that evening, I returned home and stood for a long time in front of the freezer. The cookie was still there, wrapped tightly, hidden behind a bag of frozen peas, a piece of evidence, a piece of pain. I pulled it out and set it on the counter. I didn't unwrap it. I just stared at it. So much could have ended with that one cookie. My life, Walter's, everything. I kept thinking about the note. "Hope you enjoy every bite. You deserve it." The words haunted me. There had been a time I would have cried reading something like that from Camilla, but now they felt like a threat disguised as affection. Detective Klein called again that night. "She confessed," he said plainly. I sat down slowly. "To what?" "To everything," he replied. "She admitted to poisoning the cookies with aconitine, said she had no intention of killing you, said it was meant for Walter only, that he'd destroyed everything she'd worked for. But she still sent them to me," I whispered. "She said she knew you'd never eat them all, that you'd share because that's who you are." His voice was gentle. "She counted on that." I felt a mix of nausea and heartbreak rise in my chest. "She's being charged with attempted murder, financial fraud, and several other crimes. The prosecution has everything they need." My hands were cold even though the room was warm. "Will I need to testify?" "Most likely, but not yet." After the call, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at that one last cookie. The thing about poison is, it doesn't just live in your body. It lives in your memories, in your trust, in the way you question everything afterward. For days, I debated throwing it away, burning it, burying it, but I couldn't. So I found a small, clear box and placed it inside, sealed tight. I tucked it into the highest shelf of my cabinet, where I'd never see it unless I was looking for it. A reminder, not just of what happened, but of how easily love can disguise danger. I still don't know when I'll be ready to visit Camilla. I don't know what I'd say. I miss the daughter I raised, the girl with scraped knees and wild dreams, but the woman she became, I don't recognize her. I don't know if I ever really did. For now, I'm rebuilding. I bake my own cookies again, plain ones. I drink my tea slowly. I sit in the sunlight when I can. And I visit Walter every week. Some days I open the drawer where I keep the note and read it again. Not because I want to, but because I need to remember what trusting blindly can cost. And I remind myself every day, not every gift is meant to be opened. Not every child stays the same. And not every story ends sweet.